Hello, Anson.
Hello, Dr. Bradley. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
My volume was low, I guess. Had to fix it.
The project definitely looks interesting. I looked through that. I didn't get a chance to respond. I guess I'll send you some questions about it later.
Okay. Yeah, we'll discuss it in a little bit when we start. Hello, Jesse.
Good morning, Jesse.
Good morning.
How are you?
Okay, I'm tired, but it's been a good week overall. Interesting times. How are you doing?
Oh, pretty good. Pretty good. So, all right. I don't know who else is going to come in, but we can get started, and then when they come in, they can catch up. We'll be online, so it's not like people can see the thing in its entirety. So let's see. Welcome to the meeting. I have a couple of things to cover here. Actually, a lot of things, but a lot of small things, I guess, we're going to cover today. So the first thing is Jesse and I, congratulations. We presented at CSP Conf number 5. This is their 5th year. So that went pretty well. We had a captive audience of I don't know how many hundreds of people around the crowdcast.
Yeah, I think they were up to 800 or 900 or so.
Yeah. So they were pretty interested in the presentation. They said that they're going to, right now the talks have been recorded on Crowdcast, but they're going to put them onto a YouTube page. And so let's see if I can find the YouTube channel for this. Then the YouTube channel has a lot of talks from past conferences. So they've had this is their 5th year, so they have things from previous years on the channel here. And then if you're interested in the conference itself, it's csvconf.com. They just, they have the program from this year, and they have the keynotes, and that might be of interest to people as well. So, Jesse, I noticed that you sent me last night, you sent me some slides about your experience with ICLR and CFV. CSV.
I'm sorry, what was that?
Oh, no, I had to correct myself with CSV. But yeah, so is that something you were thinking of sharing this morning, or?
Yeah, I know it's very last minute. It'd be very, it's something that I could do. I could do it now or some other time. I wouldn't want to spend too much time on it. There's just a couple slides, but conceptually, there were certain elements within the conference that really interplayed between ICLR and CSV, and I'm like, I think I might want to explore that more.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Why don't you share your screen?
Okay, let me get this up here. Alright, I kind of forgot how I did this last time. I did this. Present screen. Yes.
Lower right-hand corner of the screen if you scroll up.
I should be presenting my screen soon.
Yeah, there it is.
Okay. Oh, is it still going?
Yeah, it's fine.
Alright, can you see the slides now?
Yep. Right there.
Yeah. Great. So, if this loads... Okay, should be loading now. So this is a very quick thing. It's a lot of like there are tweets, and I don't really know how great that is, but it also makes things easier if you just copy that sometimes. But this is a very quick informal thing that what I would like to. I've actually already done work on this. I don't know how this has come from the lab or not, but I've collaborated with people on technology and ethics before, so it's sort of a personal interest. But I wanted to throw these things together really quick, just because there were some very interesting narratives or themes that came up. And as you can see, I'm just kind of pointing out the two conferences here, and the tweet on the left is kind of the centerpiece to it. On the right, and to start, Ruha Benjamin at ICLR 2020. I think I'm not going to go in depth with their presentation because I did recently 2 weeks ago in the lab. So, but I wanted to mention again, and I found there was one particular quote from her whole talk that really stood out to me. I tried to find it in the slides, and it wasn't directly on the slides, but it's close enough. And it's basically this: what is computational depth without historical or sociological depth? And that kind of has to do with, what. In the talk, it came up as this very much, balance. What are we learning, and what are we thinking about when we're creating these structures? And I'm reminded, actually, I don't have it in the slides here, but a few years ago, I got very interested in looking at how different fields, technical fields, deal with ethics. And like if you're familiar with like traditional engineering, like a civil engineer, there's a concept like wearing an engineer's ring, so that every time you assign the document or the blueprint or whatever you're finishing, you have this weight on your finger. The weight represents the responsibility of what you are creating, and realizing that people are going to be using this. And it kind of civil engineers build bridges and things that people use every day, and there's this inherent sort of like code of honor and responsibility that comes with what's designed. And I believe the article was something it was kind of a criticism of people call themselves software engineers because it was saying if you want to act like an engineer, you should really strive for the kind of responsibility that comes with it. And that was sort of one of the first real critiques that I remember as, because I also should probably mention that I am an ex-political scientist. I was a political science person. I did political science, international relations, global political economy, and coming from that perspective, I actually came to technology because I wanted to get away from politics somewhat, which is slightly ironic in what I'm saying here, but also very much. I wanted to get away, but I also wanted to be in a place that I knew would be a driver for it. And my point is here, I think it's important to have that kind of a balance, and even for an ethics perspective of having consequences or understanding what you're building and how it's going to affect the flow of, maybe not cars over a bridge, but information into people's minds or how things work is a very important thing. And even from coming from different backgrounds in that, I think is quite important. So, again, very rushed background on some things where I'm coming from. But to go to the next point specifically, this wasn't in her slide specifically, but she did say it. She kind of voiced this specific. She voiced these exact words, and I feel like it's a really powerful encapsulation of a lot of things. Like obviously, deep learning is sort of a machine learning term, and it's not quite being used. The implication here for what is shallow deep learning is a bit poetic, but I personally do believe this to be the case, and Ruha does a great job of this in her talk and her book and everything else. So check out all of her work for that. But to kind of put that as the background of proper training for people making the engineering products and technology products of the future. I really enjoyed the CSV conference because, and I didn't get to spend that much time in it, but I'm going to highlight two things here. One of them is the talk that I think directly preceded us, and then also the keynote on the second day. The talk that directly preceded our presentation in session 5. So high five to Bradly and myself for, I think that went well. But I was actually really, given the title of it, I didn't really know what to expect. And I'm like, okay, that's cool. But when I saw the talk by Selena Ho, I believe, and you can see them right there. And also, definitely check out Zenodo for the slides. I can link them later if anybody wants them. Decision making for successful data analysis. And I really like what successful is in quotes here, and so I really like how she wrote it in her discussion too. I'm going to poorly recreate that here, but she starts it out with this quote: "Technology at present is covert philosophy," and she highlights that as a singular phrase. And like, that's an interesting way to think about it. Like, what does that mean? Does it mean it's like there's I don't know. I'm not sure if this is in one of the slides later, but essentially the idea comes with technology is sort of a creation of a particular philosophical viewpoint. Okay, and obviously there's more to this quote that we'll get to in a second. But then she went into analysis is covert ideology. So again, to go back, if technology is covert philosophy, analysis is covert ideology. One of the points she made. And what does that really get at? Like if technology is a particular thing, and then the creation of data, or some of the tools on which we get data, then it's almost like analysis is sort of that square, or that to a different degree. Like it's very compounded. So ideology and views are embedded in analysis of the data. CSV, a data conference. And she really spells it out in "You're never just an engineer, an analyst, a data scientist." And I really feel like that harkens back to kind of some of the first things I said, even about the engineering and all that stuff. It's like, if you see yourself as just a lot of times in the tech community, and I'll say this speaking for myself and not to other people, and also the business community, which I was originally a business major, but it's like there can be this very isolated perspective. Oh, your job is just to do X, Y, Z to get this profit, to get this objective achieved, to create this product. And I feel like yes, that is part of it, but there's also this reality that isn't quite the case. You're enacting things. There's another slide. I don't need to have it here, but there's another slide that says like you're already at the table, even if you don't seem like it. So I really encourage people to look at the whole Selena's presentation. But just skimming through it very quickly here, the whole quote was, "Technology at present is covert philosophy. The point is to make it openly philosophical." And I think one of my law friends who is very into philosophy here, Val, and it's like, I think a lot of these talks are, let's step back and realize this isn't just a neural network. This isn't just crunching numbers. This isn't data. This is something to examine. What is the ideology? What is beyond? What is the inception of the analysis? That we're performing. And I think this is I'm really glad to see these talks popping up at ICLR and CSV. Like these are important things in my opinion. And one of the other quotes that Selena had is, "Objectivity is a subject's delusion that observing can be done without it. Involving objectivity is abrogating responsibility and its popularity." That's a huge book to unpack, and I don't even want to try to do it right now because I don't want to spend too much time here. But I really encourage people to think about that. What is objectivity? And I think there are also some tremendously interesting implications for embodiment in this concept. So I'm just going to kind of, why don't you think about that in your spare time and whatnot. But I would say it's, and I believe a slight tangent into something else in ICLR, this from Lacoon about AGI not existing and AGI being a specialized intelligence. So I think there's a bit of I think these two slides are quite, they don't seem it, but they're quite directly related. Not sense of bashing AGI as a concept, but what is specialization? What is actual embodiment? What is environmental interaction affecting things? So let's see. Keep moving quickly back to this concept. What is superficial learning? What is superficial engineering? What is superficial data creation? We have these very derivative. If creating big data and whatnot, and all of these data products are sort of, I don't want to say layers of difference from the raw reality of things. It's a very basic neural network analogy. The more layers you have, the more filtered your information. But it's important for people to understand those layers. And the last thing I wanted to mention, kind of highlight as part of the CSV conference, was the second day keynote speaker, Emily Jacoby. And I only got a little bit of her talk, but I really encourage you to check it out because she's she focused on her work with digital democracy and indigenous peoples. But one of my things that I've been quite a lot about lately is the concept of if we're creating quite a bit of data tools, technology tools, and ways of influencing, particularly government decision making, there were a few talks, I believe, at both CSV and ICLR about the automation process of decision making, how that influences things, and some of the ethics, just tools behind that. I think we're at a point where one thing that I will be contributing more and engaging directly on that. We have so much sort of lateral or downward facing artificial intelligence technology. Let's keep track of what people around us are doing. Let's keep track of what. Let's find ways to sort of monitor those that are on the same level of influence. And those sort of beneath, like the people we're supervising, like children in school, trying to break example of that school, and everything's really COVID. But there's quite a bit of what I would say lateral or downward facing monitoring and data processing for people who are perceived at sort of adjacent levels of what has. And what I've been thinking about is that there needs to be enough focusing in an opposite direction towards what is regulating itself, where our higher power structures and monitoring surveillance that. And so without getting more into that, I'll conclude with specifically democracy itself as a an organization. I'm not very familiar with it, but the way that Emily spoke about it in the presentation, I think it's very much worth looking into, both as a people who would like to apply their technical skills and outreach and to good causes, but also as an example of what I was talking about making sure a lot of AI and data products are not just sort of downward facing, and they can punch up towards the systems that are influencing things. So I think that's my final slide here. Thanks for talking, listening to my talk, my TED talk, and my laptop. I think I'm going to write more about this and other things. Some blog posts. I know I cleared blog posts to write, which I definitely want to do. This is a bit of a tangent and personal stuff, but I wanted to mention that. So, you're listening, and we can move on to other things or have questions or what else.
Yeah, thank you, Jesse. So you can put the link to the slides in the chat so people can access them. And then, do we have any questions? Observations? I mean, we don't have to do it now. We can do it offline later. I mean, just give some food for thought. But yeah, that was a very good summary of some of the themes across the conferences. I know, like, when you go to a conference, it's pretty overwhelming sometimes. You have to spend time unpacking it, like, after the conference, kind of thinking about what you've seen.
Absolutely. And I feel like I think a more like talking about is there somewhat filter and cherry pick. Like, this isn't what two conferences were about by any means. But I'm absolutely, like, I wrote someone the online activity that is going on in light of the pandemic have really been lifesavers to me. Like, I really appreciate that. And so seeing, like, I didn't go to ICLR because of an ethics thing or CSV for sure. I wasn't going there because I wanted to see these things. But I'm pleasantly surprised to see that they are there. And I don't have tremendous experience with these things, but I think it's important that these concepts are coming up more and more in everyday talk about, how information is being created. So I'm happy to see that. And if you want to talk more about the general conference, I know you mentioned talking about CSV stuff in your presentation. I open the floor to do that for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So we have the link to the conference from this year. Like I said, the YouTube channel is they'll be putting the talks up there.
Oh.
I had to restart my browser. Sorry about that. So so everyone's back. Okay, good. So let me see if I can restart or go onto the dynamic walking page. Why don't I just share my screen here? And
I think I got to check in briefly, but I'm curious. Did you get to go to much of the event?
Oh well, yeah. So I didn't pull up the YouTube page, but they have a YouTube archive.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Different talks. So here's the website, and I think if you just go to YouTube and search for Dynamic Walking 2020, you can pull up the sessions. There's 4 sessions. So this was supposed to be held in at a resort, and of course they couldn't do They couldn't do it because of COVID. And I like the way here's the YouTube channel here. So I like the way they did this. What they did was they had a Slack team for the conference, and then in the channels they had the different poster sessions. So each poster had a channel devoted to it, and so people could, you could put the poster in there. People could give comments on the posters and so forth, and it was all sort of set up in there. And then this is this conference was about, it's called Dynamic Walking. So it's basically about analyzing walking and movement. And it could be in humans, it could be in animals, and it could be in robots. So they did a lot of sessions on kinesiology, sports, kinesiology. But they also had sessions on robotics, which is teaching robots how to walk. And then they had even a couple talks on birds, and there's a woman who does research on different birds and how they walk and how they locomote. So there was a lot of underlying that are a bunch of themes related to energy conservation and kinematics and things like that. So this is the YouTube channel here. If you go to the YouTube channel, you'll see that they have an archive of talks. There it is. So I think they're right up at the top. So these were all these were on Zoom, and then they streamed them to YouTube. So it's just the different sessions, and they had I've been there in person. It's a fairly small conference. It's pretty intimate, maybe a couple hundred people total. But the people, giving talks, you might have 30 people maybe giving talks. It's kind of like CSV in a way, but it's a different topic. So, hi, Stefan. I just wanted to put a link for the dynamic walking sessions. You may have missed most of that, but I was just introducing the conference. So if you're interested in robotics or just, human movement or whatever, that's a good conference to check out. The thing about YouTube conferences is you can skip through the talks you don't find relevant and talk about or listen to the things that you do find relevant, and then go back and listen to what they said, a couple times. It's kind of like you can't do that in a regular conference. Usually you listen to them, you may hear something, and then you have to ask, if that's what you heard. But with a recorded conference, you can go back over the recording and check. So that's the Dynamic Walking Conference. That happened Thursday. And the next thing I want to talk about is, Lanson dropped out for a minute. I was going to start with our papers for the week. So let me put this in the chat. So this is our folder of papers. And I don't know when Anson's going to be back here. I was going to go through this color space data set with him. But we do have a couple of papers. Why don't I go through maybe 1 or 2 papers, and then we'll get back to the color space data set.
Yeah, I know he was definitely interested in talking about that. So.
Yeah. Let's see. So we have a bunch of papers in the queue sort of piled up from different weeks. So I've got, like, every time I find an interesting paper, I put it in here. Let's see. What do we talk about? Maybe this one here first. And this is the 2 forms of knowledge representation in the human brain. So this is a paper that came out recently. It's on the bioRxiv, but I think it's on other, I don't know what journal it's being published in, but it looks really interesting. So this abstract is sensory experience shapes what and how knowledge is stored in the brain. Our knowledge about the color of roses depends in part on the activity of color response neurons, based on experiences of seeing roses. We study the brain basis of color knowledge in congenitally blind individuals whose color knowledge can only be obtained through language descriptions. We found that some regions support color knowledge only in the sighted. More importantly, a region in the left dorsal anterior temporal lobe supports objective color knowledge in both blind and sighted groups, indicating the existence of a sensory independent knowledge coding system in both groups. Thus, there are at least 2 forms of object knowledge representation in the brain, sensory derived and cognitively derived, and it's supported by different brain systems. So what they're saying is that when we think of color, a lot of times we think of color as being like, you see a color, it's a certain wavelength, your brain tries to figure out what the wavelength is, and then that's your color. It's not quite that simple, actually. In this paper, they're suggesting that you have both this sort of physiological system, but also this cognitive system. I don't know if there are any good figures in here, but that interprets that. Oh, hi, Anson, you're back.
Yeah, I lost my connection.
That's okay. So I think Jesse's slides are in the chat. So. Oh.
Yeah, add it in quick.
All right. Yeah. So this is an example of the official object color representation. So again, we're talking about, different colors, both in terms of the raw color and then different objects. So let's see. Let's unpack this figure here. So this B looks interesting. What is that about? Object color space is obtained through in-scale MDS, which is a dimensionality reduction method, where the multi-dimensional scaling, where they take a bunch of variables and they boil it down to its sources of variance. They put it in a common metric space, and then they look at how they fall out in those metric spaces. So these are for colors from each group. So these are, I think, objects, and they have a color. And this is how what the response looked like in their 2 groups. So they had two experimental groups, the congenitally blind and SC, which is, I can't remember what SC is. Sighted control. So the sighted control. So, what they're doing here too is they're taking people who are blind, who are congenitally blind, and they're, using that against the sighted control to see if there's a representation of, what the differences in representation of color are. So this is a pretty, involved paper. I don't want to try to misrepresent anything by getting any more deeply into it, but I think that's interesting that they, kind of parsed out color representation like this, that there's some part that's sort of, physiological, and then there's this other part that's cognitive. I know that there have been studies where they've looked at people from different cultures, and they've, noted that there are differences sometimes in how people perceive colors. And, it's but perceiving color is really about like putting a name to the color differences or the different gradations of color. Not so much that you're actually seeing things differently physiologically. I mean, you can see things physiologically, but then you have to interpret them in terms of how you would name them or distinguish between them. And so that's, I think, what they're kind of getting at in this paper as well, that there are different brain areas that do these different things that, recognize colors and then put some sort of identification to them or label. And so this is, let's see. Yeah, so they propose that the color perception system is one set of brain centers, and the language system, of course, is another set, and that they overlap in certain ways so that this, whole system can be enabled, so that you can actually identify color and then put it in the context of language. So that's this paper, and it's interesting I bring that up because we're going to talk about the color space data set in a minute, and that's going to be somewhat related to that. Another paper that I wanted to talk about here, we'll pick this one here, which is a general approach to progressive learning. And so this is something that came out a couple weeks ago as well. This is also another archive paper. I don't know where it's going to be published eventually, but so let's see, let me go over the abstract here. In biological learning, data is used to improve performance on the task at hand, while simultaneously improving performance on both previously encountered tasks and as yet unconsidered future tasks. In contrast, classical machine learning starts from a blank slate, or tabula rasa, using data only for the single task at hand. While typical transfer learning algorithms can improve performance on future tasks, their performance degrades upon learning new tasks. Many recent approaches have attempted to mitigate this issue, called catastrophic forgetting, to maintain performance given new tasks. But striving to avoid forgetting sets the goal unnecessarily low. The goal of progressive learning, whether biological or artificial, is to improve performance on all tasks with any new data. So they propose a general approach to what they call progressive learning, which enables representations rather than learners. We show that ensemble representations, which are like, they could be representations like decision, forecasts, or neural networks, enable both forward and backward transfer on a variety of simulated and real data tasks. And so this includes sensory things, cognitive things like vision and language, and then adversarial tasks, which are where you're comparing the thing you're learning with something that's maybe different in some way or not real, or it's interfering with that thing that you're learning. This work suggests that future improvements on progressive learning may follow from a deeper understanding of how biological learning achieves such high degrees of efficiency. I'm not sure what they mean by that, because biological learning can be very slow, it could be very quick. It depends on I think a broad statement of efficiency is a little unwarranted. But anyways, so what they're talking about in this paper is they're talking about like building representation that allows, like, say, a neural network, like we've talked about. The amount of representation in something like that is limited to deal with some of these issues of transfer learning and of trying to, generalize basically what you learn in one set of tasks to a bunch of other tasks. And so what they're basically arguing here, and which has been observed, is that when you learn on one task and then you switch the algorithm to another task, it interferes with its ability to learn and generalize. And so what they're trying to do is either, you could implement something like, to forget a lot of things that you learned before and then relearn things in another context, but that's not necessarily very efficient. Or you could have this sort of transfer learning and build this representation that enables transfer learning. And transfer learning being like going from one task, taking what you learned in one task in one context and applying it to another. So this is a nice review of this area. They talk about classical machine learning. Lifelong learning is something that they talk about. So lifelong learning generalizes classical machine learning in two ways. Instead of one task, there is an environment of possibly infinitely many tasks. And then the second is data arrive sequentially rather than batch mode. So this setting requires an algorithm generalized out of past task examples. So in other words, like, you have this out of distribution type, which is a term that they use in machine learning now to represent things that you don't often see. They're things that are atypical, instead of like trying to build a distribution around a batch of things that you get at once. Like the MNIST data set, for example, was batch mode, where you're taking a bunch of things and you're like kind of taking them in one shot and then learning everything and then trying to apply it to other data sets. And so there's been work on that. There's been work on a couple other areas of transfer learning, which they don't mention here directly, but this is something that people have been exploring for a while. So they do some evaluation of transfer efficiency. Then they look at some of these algorithms that they're trying to use here. So they're trying to develop an algorithm for progressive intelligence, which is pretty advanced if you're not like steeped in machine learning. Again, I don't want to like analyze it because I don't know if I fully understand it yet. And then lifelong forests, which is I love these terms they give these things. So lifelong forest is a decision forest-based instance of ensembling representations. So they're using something like what they call random forests, which is a technique that they use to in machine learning a lot, but this is a little bit different version of it. And so this is a good example of what they're trying to do here. For single tasks, for multiple tasks, multitask, and then this is progressive learning. And so these are their different hypotheses as to how learning occurs. So this is like single task learning, multiple tasks, and they have this, so this is the output layer, this is the hidden layer, and this is the input layer. And the hidden layer is divided into transformers, which are tools that, they use in deep learning quite a bit, and then voters. So the voters, I think, pool a lot of things from the different transformers and then give you an output, which is the decider. And so the difference between these hypotheses are the different architectures that they use for this. Let's see. And then, so they show that lifelong forests demonstrate forward and backward transfer. So they have demonstration of that. Then they kind of give some real data, vision benchmarks. They use some vision-based, they use some image processing data sets to look at this. And then they have, I don't want to get too far into this. I think we should probably move on. Anyways, this paper is available for you to read in this folder. And I have some more papers maybe I'll talk about next week, but I don't want to spend too much time on it. Any questions about that before we move on to the color data set? Okay. Yeah, we can you can take a look at those. I think I put the file folder in the chat. So if you want to look at some of those papers, you're welcome to. Like I said, there's a lot of paper now in recent weeks on, like I've been running across a lot of papers on representations and other things that are interesting in terms of what we've been talking about in the group, but I don't have time to get into all of them. So we'll cover some more of those next week. The last thing I want to talk about today is this color data space, or color space data set. So now I talked to Anson a little bit about this, and this actually refers kind of back to the first paper that I talked about, which is this idea that we perceive colors and we can perceive a certain range of colors. Our eyes have physiology to pick out different colors based, we have a trichromatic system of vision, so we can pick out colors in that space. So you have three different cone types representing three different primary colors, and then we can perceive colors around that. We can actually pick out colors within that space. Something like UV light or something like infrared light, we can't observe directly. We need machines for that. Some organisms, like lizards and amphibians, and some species, they have what they call quadchromatic vision, and that means they have an extra type of cone that allows them to perceive UV bands of light, so they can pick up a broader range of light spectra. So, but then of course as humans, we have this extra system where we classify colors and we identify colors based on like some linguistic criterion. So we give it a name. And so that's the kind of thing we're getting at with this color space data set. What we're trying to do is create a data set that it's not so much that we can identify colors, it's that we can identify colors and maybe in a way that's like linguistically relevant, or we can create different cultures that identify colors differently. So this is, I don't know if you can really see it. I have it in the Slack. I sent Anson like this conversation that I had in Slack with, this was Google Summer of Code in 2018. So back then we were trying to find a data set to benchmark for our CGS models. And we ended up going in the direction of linguistics. We ended up going in the direction of Google Ngram, which is like where you have a database of word fragments and you can mine them for different words and different what they call Ngrams. But this is a different approach we chose not to go with. This is where you have sort of a representation of color space. And so there's the Rgb color space, which a lot of people are familiar with if you do anything with computer graphics. You have your red, your green, and your blue, and you have combinations of those. And so all the colors in that palette are combinations of those three. There are other palettes, though, like the Cie palette, which is a little bit different than it's a subtractive rather than an additive space. And so it works on the same principle, combines different primary colors, but it gives you this space of colors that have an identification. It has a label attached to it. So it's like in RGB, it's like you have three tuple, or three different numbers that represent that color. And, it's like the red, the green, and the blue component. And it's some mix of those. So that's the way we identify those. And that's fine. That's actually something you can like benchmark, like on a computer. You can generate that color and you can identify it as what? We don't have a name necessarily for the color. So we identify it maybe by its number, by its hex code, but by a name is a little bit tricky because people will see a color, and depending on their experience, or sometimes they might be colorblind, which is a physiological issue. They won't be able to see that color in the same way that you will. And so, but that's the thing. That's the idea, is that there aren't names on these. We have numbers for them, but we don't have names. And so I don't have the link here, but there is a project that's going on now where they got they're taking a bunch of colors. I think I have a link to it in the repo, and I can share that with Anson, the repo location and everything, where we'd want to work on it. But they have this project where people are proposing names for different colors. So they're doing this kind of already, where they have three tuple identification of a color, which is a computer code, and then you can generate that color, and then someone gives it a name. Because right now, you could call it blue, you could call it light blue, you could call it teal, depending on how much effort you're putting into it, or what your language has in it. to give the name. And so, what we're trying to do though is come up with representational spaces of different color identifications. And so that's the idea. And but we can also correlate this with other things. So this is something, it was a little bit unclear in the Slack. Oh, go ahead.
So I just wanted to make sure I understood the deliverable so far. So as opposed to like there are a lot of like pre-existing, like Pantone, for example, the painting company already has like a huge. I'm pretty sure they already have like their own pre-existing labels, names for all the CYMK, well, RGB colors. So as opposed to taking pre-existing labels, what we're doing now is we're interested in creating a framework for articulating the ambiguities in how people perceive color. Like, for example, in the Japanese, for example, there's more of a merging of blue and green because I forgot the particular linguistic difference. I think there's not a word. Well, there's not a word for green, so a lot of the times they call what turquoise blue. Well, they call turquoise blue when we would call turquoise. So I think so. What you're saying is you would. So I guess I'm still a little bit confused with the deliverable. So with this, this is more of like. So I guess the real interesting part is like where there's disagreements. So the interesting part is more like. So the product is more like. This is a platform where we collect data so that the deliverable is this would be a platform where people can input data and then we can evaluate where there is conflicting data and what factors go into why there's conflicting data, something along those lines.
Well,
like conflicting labels for the same color.
I left out the part where this is more of like an agent-based simulation, so it isn't really like dependent on human input so much, at least at this stage. So I guess the idea. Yeah. So yeah, I guess the confusion arises from I didn't show like what platform we'd be implementing this in. So like we have an existing system which is called contextual geometric structures, which is it's a simulation platform. It's not really a platform. It's sort of a set of mathematical models and ways that we can represent or build representations for, say, like an artificial intelligence or something like that. And the idea would be to create a data set to benchmark that. And so the idea would be to kind of create a framework or like a data set, but also a framework for testing this and bringing it into like some sort of, like basically the CGS would do would be to classify the colors that it would see and then maybe attach some sort of semantic label to it. And then depending on how we configure the CGS, we could get like different answers and we could find different sort of representational schemes for colors. But the idea would be to like, I guess, create a color space and then maybe create like, I'm still trying to think of how to implement this. This is kind of the problem too, is like it's still not clear in my mind how this is going to like happen. But,
I guess I'm just thinking in terms of deliverables already, like what the goal would be, because I understand, like I used to be an art major for 2 years.
Okay.
I was a digital media major and illustration and drawing major for a couple of years before I switched to data science. So
Yeah.
I know a little bit of Photoshop. So I guess I was just thinking. So I was thinking a little bit in terms of that. So I was thinking like what the deliverables would be, what the product. So I think I'll look into. I just linked me the a little bit about the metric.
I sent the Synthetic Daisies blog post where you go into that. I found that very helpful to kind of understand.
But that was last night. I didn't get a chance to look at it.
Yeah.
So I'll look into that. So maybe that'll help me get a better understanding of what the deliverable could be for the project.
All right. Yeah, I mean,
I think right now I'm just having a hard time understanding how it'd be different than just like assigning like Pantone colors to like different RGB codes.
Yeah, I think. Well, I think what I'm trying to get at with this is, and then maybe it isn't like a data set issue ultimately, but it's like that we like kind of have these things emerge from like were learned by some sort of algorithm, not necessarily like just generated at random.
Yeah.
Like that's a thing I'm not, like I don't have clear in my mind even yet is how that would
So
work.
there'd be like an idea of like utility of colors.
Yeah. Yeah, that would probably be.
So there'd be like an idea utility of colors, like there'd be objects.
Right. So
like there'd be like red objects in the environment that are useful to the agent. Okay, that makes more sense.
Yeah.
Hmm?
So maybe like,
Sorry.
one way to do that would be to assign some sort of like, like utility profile or something to the colors. So like, it wouldn't be just like a color space. It would be like, have like the colors have some sort of like, profile, like maybe their utility, maybe there's a preference profile. Like you think about like when we like something that's red versus like something that's blue, we pay more attention to the thing that we like than what we don't like maybe. So, I mean, we don't want to simulate every reason why that is, but just to have like a overlying sort of, preference sort of landscape. So every color value then would have some sort of like association with like maybe a preference or like, some, I mean, a lot of people use energy functions, but I don't know how that would be.
So it's about modeling some kind of emergence of distinction of complex distinctions of colors.
Yeah.
That resembles the way we do it.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. And then like the key though too would be that like there would be like a, it wouldn't be the same every time. It'd be very generative. So we'd have like we could use depending on our agents and their preferences, it would be different. So you'd have it would be generative, and then over time it would you'd get a different answer depending on the configuration of the agents, and that basically be the idea. So I guess the deliverable would be
like a flexible model.
Yeah,
and I think it would be good. We don't have to go into this now, but in Slack we can talk about this. But like particularly going like I don't know if Anson's that familiar yet with like the brain brick vehicles and the very traditional concept of like a light phobic or a light chasing brain brick vehicle or steered towards something. Like that's like a non-representational format of things. Like if you have a very simple robot looking at light or not. And there's no representation there, but adding the CGS layer on top of that would have some kind of differentiation in terms of this is a red color, and where does this red color fit with how I'm feeling, like the other like more representational associations with that. So that's specific to our recent implementation of things in the lab, but
I think I think adding color onto Brainbird vehicles really makes it click like what the context is.
Yeah, and again, that's like a specific. The contextual geometric is obviously applies to much more than that, but given what we've done and what the original G code for this demo is going to be, that's how it's kind of.
I should definitely look into complex geometric modeling.
Is it contextual or complex?
Contextual. Yeah.
I think our
Contextual, yeah.
we named our contextual. What was the actual summer project? Contextual
Neurodevelopmental something. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
Because they're combining two, but names are kind of tricky. Usually, you can play around with them until you publish a paper or something. Then it's forever. But I mean,
thanks for explaining that. It makes it a lot more. I have a better grasp of. Yeah, that sounds really interesting. I'd love to. That sounds like a really fascinating project for the summer. That sounds really fascinating to be involved with.
Yeah. I think Jesse actually had I think a better way of explaining it than I was going to. But thank you, Jesse, for that. But I think that's a good way to put it. The context is the key, I think, to this. Getting where would you apply it is going to be the key. And I think in the context of a Bratenberg vehicle where you have this very low, no representation layer, where you're taking in inputs and you're processing them. But then the idea is, we want to maybe add in a little bit of context to that system. So in the project, the Summer of Code project that Jesse applied to that didn't get funded, we were going to do a multi-layer thing where we had the Bratenberg vehicle beneath and then the CGS on top. But this is a project to sort of create a benchmark for that. So it's how do you build this representation? Do you just kind of say, this is how you represent color? Well, we know that from AI experiments of the past that doesn't necessarily work. That just ascribing knowledge to your system is pretty brittle. I mean, it's not something that usually pans out well. It doesn't transfer well. So this is an attempt to be a little bit more general.
The bitter lesson appears again.
Time to up my machine learning and map and learn a lot and do a lot of research.
Yeah. So the last part of this was so you can take the colors and you can apply it to other attributes. So in this case, we had a color index, which is something that it was kind of not really grounded in the color space. But the idea would be you'd have this representation where you would rank a color based on some criterion from 0 to 1. And then, whatever that is, that could be associated with, say, a polygon of different sides. So in this case, we were looking at, Sam from 2018, he generated these polygons from 4-sided to 16-sided, I think. And then he would randomly associate this color index with the polygons. And so this is the example of that relationship. Now, in this case, it's pretty scattered because there wasn't anything special about the color index. But if you could imagine if you create a color index where, there's a color that, their preferences or things like that in the space, that you attach it to polygons of different shapes or different numbers of sides that you can end up with, maybe there's some associative learning going on between shapes, polygons, and then color. I mean, and I don't think this really gets it across very well, but the idea is you can make a relationship between two different attributes. So colors are on surfaces, and then we interpret the blue car or a red cup. We'll use the shape as a sort of an intermediary between the color and the thing that you're identifying. So, and that's something that probably is a little bit beyond what we were talking about making. That would be a next step, would be to associate then the color space with objects.
Yeah, I was also going to say I regarding the thing that I said before too, that's kind of part of that. That's actually a good example for
like what I was going to present, well, what I sort of presented or will present again, I guess, at NeuroMatch with the embodiment and layers representation. Like, this is actually a concrete example of that. So I actually, just on that note, I know NeuroMatch 2.0 is your applications are due by the 20th, so that's soon. I haven't finished mine yet, but I'm going to do that. So maybe next week, if necessary, I could present what I was supposed to present for anyway. But this all fits into that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I could apply too. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Oh, we were going to say something, Anson.
Sorry.
Oh, no. Oh, you were going to say something, and Jesse said something, and then...
I interrupted you.
Oh, I was just... I forgot. I don't...
Oh.
No. I don't think it was that important. I think it was just follow. I think it was just like finishing up a thought.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's good. So we'll revisit this, of course, next week, and then subsequent weeks. We'll just kind of go on Slack, and we'll kind of work things out there, and we can work things out in the meeting. And we don't really have a timeline on this. It's just something I think that would be beneficial to Anson to work on a project, and then we can fit it in, of course, with the other things that we're doing with this stuff that we've talked about. So, we'll, like I said, the timeline is, we don't really have a timeline. We don't have, like, any grant or, like, fellowships to, like, sort of, work around the requirements, so we can work on this at our pace. But I think we should keep the conversation going forward. So, yeah. And then NeuroMatch 2.0 is coming up. Oh, go ahead.
I'm going to set some personal research goals for myself, but because my health is volatile and I'm going up and down right now, I'm going to make them flexible.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's good.
Yeah.
And then NeuroMatch 2.0 is coming up, so that's in a couple weeks. So next week probably will be the opportunity to, I don't know if it'll happen, well, our meeting I think is before the thing, but like I submitted something, and I know Jesse's submitting something, and we can do a dry run in the meeting here. So if Jesse wants to do that next week, we can do that.
Okay, yeah, we'll talk about that.
Yeah, and then it doesn't have to be a finished product. It's kind of like just here's what I want to do, and maybe you can get some feedback.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see what it looks like.
I think I want to. I still need to send my application to attend. I think I want to attend.
Okay.
I know you did the academy, which is great.
Yeah, I didn't do 2.0 though yet.
Yeah.
Oh, I think I have to finish. I think I have to finish my round 2 application for that. But oh well. Anyway,
they did round 2 for Europe for the academy already.
Yeah, it's like they just sent an email a few days ago, I think. So.
Oh, I didn't see it yet. Oops.
You should check that. Also, one other thing, like really quick, if I can present my screen again, just
wait a minute,
to
I'm
note.
not presenting mine.
Just,
there we go.
Turn this off here. Oops, I'm doing this right yet. Here we go. Let me see.
Sorry, could I quickly interrupt you, please? I just need to go, really. And I had actually an off-topic thing that I wanted to ask. It's namely about that I think about applying to biomedical computing masters. And one of the requirements is, kind of a scientific essay with references and things and all the stuff. And as a topic, I've picked one of 4 possible, and it's namely about computer diagnosis, computer-aided diagnosis, if to be specific.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the topic is, the exact topic is computer-aided diagnosis, Boon or Bay. It's its name.
All right.
And yeah, for that, I just wanted to ask whether, if anyone has maybe some paper suggestion about, successes and failures of computer-aided diagnosis. maybe in specific, or some review paper about computer-aided diagnosis and what's happening in the field?
Well, I don't think I know of anything offhand. I could look around and see in my library if I have something. This is for like diagnosing like medical diseases from images, or is that?
Yeah. It's all sorts of things. So one of it is like imaging, processing. You know, it's as I understand it, it's more like of a help to a physician. If you have some tool at hand which could kind of look or process your image that you have of a patient and could like aid you in basically setting up the diagnosis or making the diagnosis for this patient. Yeah, so it's also imaging.
Yeah.
Of course. Yeah, I will be just glad if you come across something, guys. Just let me know.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't have anything on my mind, but I actually was in a discussion that was like about this or like very adjacent to this, and I probably could ask the person I was talking to for something. So I'll probably I know. Also, thank you for putting your email in the chat.
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
Josie, when you're one friend.
Am I what? Sorry, my internet was very bad for a second, so I think Anson asked me something.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, I really have to go now. Just if you have something, feel free. Yeah, just pass it on to me, this article or review or whatever.
Okay, thank you.
Right,
I will be glad.
Yeah, if you want me to take a look at it too, I can look it over and give you some, edits if you want to have like a sounding board for it.
Okay, yeah, maybe I'll do
I was
that.
going to say, couldn't you ask Dan?
See how it goes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was saying, couldn't you ask Dan? Dan Elton, Jesse? No.
Yes, I acknowledge your statement.
Yep.
Yeah.
See you around 7.
Okay, see you around, guys.
All right,
Thanks for the meeting and have a nice weekend.
You too.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Okay, you were going to present something.
Real quick, speaking of YouTube stuff, I had completely no knowledge about, but then I saw it and I just want to do like a very brief, this is really cool. It's actually from the Conrad lab. I forgot Conrad.
Recording? Yeah.
Oh, I was just saying, Jesse, couldn't you ask Dan Elton?
Huh?
Yeah, I guess so.
Oh.
I'm not talking about Dan now.
Bye-bye.
All right. What happened to Jesse? Well, Jesse? I think we lost him. Hello? I don't know what happened. There we are, Jesse.
I don't really know what happened there.
Yeah, it froze up. I think your screen is still here. Anson's still on, but I don't know if he's frozen.
Okay, well, I'll try this one last time. If it doesn't work, no big deal. Anyway, present screen, start broadcast, 3, 2, 1. Okay, are you seeing my screen yet?
Yeah, it's coming back up. Yeah, there it is.
Okay. Can you see this now?
Yes, I see that. Yeah, okay, there we go. Unique Student Symposium.
Yeah, I found out about this like just beforehand and just before today's meeting, and I thought like Conrad Coding, who's a major person behind NeuroMesh everything. I really suggest people check it out because as a really interesting talk, does the brain do something like back propagation? And he was taking a kind of sympathetic view because a lot of people,
don't like that. And I just caught like 10 minutes of the talk, but apparently this unique student symposium thing, a virtual event where neuroscience and artificial intelligence converge. It sounds pretty cool.
I think
and it's on YouTube somewhere.
That's bad.
But yeah, I would say check that out. It's on YouTube somewhere.
Yeah.
That's unfortunate timing.
It's fine. It's not
Okay.
But that's it. I just wanted to mention that. Like, that was live on YouTube, and it seemed pretty cool. So yeah.
Good. Yeah. Yeah, that's good. So yeah, thanks for meeting. I know we're over time, but
Yeah, sorry about that.
well, that's fine. I mean, it's like we have a lot of technical glitches today, but so why don't we call it quits for today, and we'll talk on Slack for a bunch of other issues that we have, and then next week's meeting, Jesse can present on NeuroMatch, and I'll probably have some stuff on NeuroMatch, and so we'll get prepared for that, and then we can talk about some of the other projects and so forth. So,
Is there a specific place in Slack we should talk about, like all the CGS color stuff?
I think
Is that
there's
like
I think there's a CGS channel.
Yeah, there is. Okay.
And I can get Anson on that, and we can get, and so I'll kind of put a place.
Yeah,
I'll say
I
where we
guess
should
it's-
discuss it. So
Yeah.